As World War Z roared on, the line of zombies had reached Afghanistan's border. After having invested in more bombers earlier, Hamid Karzai now urged to build more air bases in order for more airstrikes to be performed. On the border of Russia, chaos continued as the zombies fought east and west, making the opening towards Russia's ground wider with each passing week. In Turkey, that endured great losses over the past months, things finally seemed to have calmed down a bit. Besides sustaining a lot of losses, the Turkish troops were also able to do quite a lot of damage to the undead. The initial battles in Afghanistan were, as expected, harsh, and on several points the zombies advanced. Russia's President Vladimir Putin set on a new focus of a collaboration with China. Putin saw China as invaluable in the battle at the border, and prioritized the migration of Chinese troops through Russia to reinforce. China's Hu Jintao agreed and set in motion the building of better infrastructure to support this migration. In Africa, the link between the West and Central invasion forces had almost been secured. Christmas of that year for the first time was a somber one. There were some who lost hope, many who had lost loved ones, but there were also those who stayed positive. They looked towards the future with the promised better technology in the coming years to drive out the zombies. And not all was bad. Rwanda was able to pierce the zombies' lines, spearheading their way north. And the West Central units were able to link up with Angola and start heading east to secure more land. At the Russian border, the zombies were on their way to start the traversal of the mountains. The only positive thing about this was that it would take the zombies months to traverse the harsh environment, giving Putin and his troops time to prepare. And then the year of 2004 was upon the world, a crucial year which could make or break the further outcome. A year where the first of the improved and promised technological advancements should show its face. Many countries started to utilize modern electrical grids to gain resources more efficiently and tactical upgrades to both troops, armor, artillery, and more. Turkey started the year with a counteroffensive, where the new year motivated their troops to stand together. In Russia, the spirit of the country of Georgia had all but withered as the zombies had now a giant opening towards Russia. The worrying part was that Russia did not have many troops of their own at the ready at the mountain border. In Africa, the Indian dominance halted, as many were sent back to the mainland in preparation for the zombie horde. They would still have to go through Pakistan, but many knew that Pakistan did not have the necessary force to oppose a threat. President Muhammad Rafiq Tarar knew this as well. His tactics, however, were to invest in naval combat and slow the zombies down with barrages from the sea. Then halfway through January, in Africa, the first of the Canadians had finally arrived. Not only that, but more British troops had landed as well and headed towards the front lines. In Portugal, the Dutch army led by Martin Bijnen had begun preparations for their invasion of the northern coast of Africa. Preparations would take a little over 50 days. In the Middle East, it was Turkmenistan that suffered the most as the zombies chewed through their lines like a knife through butter. Afghanistan, though losing territory, was able to hold for now, and Pakistan was pushed back on 2 locations. At the Russian border, more Russian troops had arrived to reinforce, and combat was well underway. Skirmishes were brief, messy, and barely seemed to work effectively, as the rough terrain made it difficult to target them in clustered groups. Turkey, on the other hand, made incredible progress and started to win a lot of territory back. With Canada having begun to send in troops to Africa, Jean Chrétien vowed to build more docks to keep sending in reinforcing units. Turkmenistan had been slaughtered. In less than 2 months, almost the entire country had fallen, meaning Uzbekistan was next. Uzbekistan's president Islam Karimov, like so many others, invested in air bases, a tactic that had proven to have failed over and over again, but mankind, like so many times in the past, refused to listen. Afghanistan and Pakistan did not fare much better either. Turkey's Bülent Ecevit had successfully focused on ground military development that was partially the reason for the successful pushback. Ecevit issued the importance of keeping the pace and put constant pressure on the undead menace. Throughout the months, Turkey had suffered almost 400,000 deaths in the battle, but the ability to push back was a clear message that hope should not be abandoned until one's last breath had been drawn. Wijnand's army successfully had landed in Africa, but the zombies had already spread over the front line in the west and south, meaning it did not take long before they found themselves surrounded as well. With the zombies having reached Europe, a fourth invasion attempt seemed highly unlikely. In Pakistan, the zombies seemed unstoppable. A combined force of Pakistani, Chinese, and Russian heavy tanks got overrun quickly, and the undead moved southeast, closing in on the Indian border. The mass migration of Indian troops that was still underway raised questions if they would make it in time to defend the border. In Turkey, the zombies started to push back. The Turkish troops had stumbled on major numbers again and found their counterattack to be short-lived. Uzbekistan, like Turkmenistan before, also stood no chance, losing almost everything in less than a single month. Kazakhstan was next, and where the previous leaders focused on air doctrines, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev set his sights on the ground military. They would go toe-to-toe with the zombies. Tajikistan issued a military focus as well, but it was their first time doing so, meaning their power would most likely be insignificant to slow the zombies down. The speed and ferociousness of the zombies had increased dramatically. They broke through in Russia and were now accessing terrain beyond the mountains, making it easier for them to move. Then in the second week of March, the first of the zombies had breached the Indian border. Still, with no main military defense force in sight, things looked real bleak for India. The citizens were outraged. The once proud nation making such a difference in the battlefields of Africa were now powerless to do something about the undead invader. The irony in the matter was that the regained territory in Africa did not even matter that much anymore to the West, as it was soon their homes that would come under fire. And still to that day, the lost souls continued to fight, not realizing it was all for naught. Blood was spilled day in, day out, but outside their cities was a vast desolate place of death and decay. Russia's front line was massive, and it was difficult to control it evenly on all sides. With the zombies continuing to destroy at such a breakneck pace, China would soon be confronted with the zombies as well, and in Africa, the zombies started to advance on the humans too. Millions of zombies traversed the Russian grounds, leaving behind a barren wasteland where lost scavengers roamed the landscape in search for food and medicine as the world around them slowly died. The Ukraine would be the next European country to meet the wrath of the zombies. Though speeches were once again held, faith had all but faded away. As countries like India started to realize the horrifying truth, the once positive outlook of 2004 and its promised technological improvements turned out to be but a mere fantasy. Besides the Indian troops, now the Chinese were also called back to the mainland to help with the defense of China and Russia. And in Turkey, Istanbul had finally been taken over. With the zombies now traversing over relatively flat terrain again, Putin issued an overwhelming amount of airstrikes on the approaching horde. Neighboring Kazakhstan did not fare so well with the plan going toe-to-toe with the zombies. The onslaught brought on by these undead were just too much to handle for any country, it seemed. Tajikistan, of course, also stood no chance, and by the end of April, the zombies had reached China. The world held its breath. If both China and Russia would fall, the zombies would gain an almost infinite amount of units to their horde. In India, a bunch of troops had arrived from Africa, but they were too few and too disorganized to set up a proper defense front. Hu Jintao wanted to speed up the resupply of troops and units by focusing on the southern Chinese industry. Saudi Arabia was one of the few countries who actually seemed to be able to take back land and maintain to hold it, but the resistance they faced was almost none. Though the first of the zombies had reached China's borders, heavy combat had not broken out yet. It was a waiting game, where more of the horde needed to assemble first in order to push forth as they did in Russia. With most of the Chinese and Indian forces leaving from Africa, the front line was falling in the northwest. At all places, bad news was the common tale. After the zombies would swell over the city of Rostov, the Ukrainian border would soon come in its sights. Panic was everywhere. Bulgaria had begun engaging the undead, as did the Greeks on their mainland. Turkey no longer stood a chance. Though they still held a large chunk of land in the southwest, they did not have the strength anymore to push back. Ecevit admitted defeat, and with the last focus on naval forces, he started to evacuate the leftovers of the Turkish government. Then in the final week of May, the battle in Ukraine had begun as well. They were backed up by German and Russian troops. The front line at India had come to a halt, mainly due to a huge amount of units being able to spread out around the country. Units from Japan, China, Russia and America all played their part. And in the Ukraine, blood continued to be spilled. It looked like death approached Europe from two sides, the south and the west. There were those who felt a religion when hope seemed far gone. To many citizens, this situation could no longer be described as a world war. To them, it was simply known as the apocalypse.